Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I thought it would be fun to rank the Doctor Who logos, as of course now we have a brand new one, or I guess old one, depending on your perspective, so I thought what better time to go over the Doctor Who logos than now. This is going to be a bit more of a chill video of me just going over some of these logos and talking about why I like and dislike them, so feel free to get a drink, chill out, and let's talk some Doctor Who logos. Also, feel free to subscribe if you're new around here. We do daily Doctor Who content here on the channel, and we're trying to get to 17,200 subscribers, as that is our next goal. I also have a Twitter if you'd like to follow me on there, but of course you don't have to. But a link will be in the description should you want to. But with that said, let's get into the video. Now, the funny thing about this is that we actually have a logo here that you can't see because the background is white, and the logo itself is also white, so that's fun. But yeah, I think we'll go from this end first and go through this way because I'm different. But we're going to start off with the 2005 version of the Russell T Davies era surfboard logo. So the difference between this one and the David Tennant one is that it doesn't have the textured back and it's just sort of a blank orangey background. And I must say, this does just feel like a beta of the better version that would come later on. I don't hate it, but it's not one that I would overly go out of my way to like have on stuff, because the one that they replaced it with later is just better in every conceivable way. I particularly associate this logo with Series 1 for obvious reasons. Yeah, it's not bad, but I think that's a solid C tier logo in my opinion. Not terrible, but obviously, better versions of it would come later on. Next up, oh, we've got a good one. We've got the Paul McGann era logo for the TV movie, which is obviously also based on the Jon Pertwee era logo. Now, this comes from one of my favourite personal title sequences, which I might make a separate video. If you guys enjoy this, you might not. But yeah, we'll see. This is basically just a shiny blue version of the classic era logo. You might know this one from the Doctor Who classic era DVDs. Actually, I think the tone of the colour of this logo is slightly different, the one that they've used on this list, as it is on the DVDs, but I digress. Yeah, this logo, really nice. I love the blue. I think blue on Doctor Who logos, as you'll see later on, is a huge pull for me because, I don't know, it just fits the show the most. It's the colour of the TARDIS. It's just the colour I associate the most with the show. So this one for me is pretty perfect, you know, it's already based off of a great logo and this just sort of refines it. So yeah, it's going in S tier. It's just a really good logo, I can't knock it. Now we have the 7th Doctor's one. Now this one's difficult because I'm in the camp of people that doesn't actually hate this. This one has kind of a mixed reception due to it being very 80s. You've got the little written Doctor with the giant Who lettering, and I think a lot of people find it a bit garish, which I do understand. I do quite enjoy it, however I do understand that perspective. With that being said though, it's by no means a favourite of mine. It's probably, you know, in my lower echelon of logos. So I'm going to feel bad for doing this, but I think it does just have to go into D tier. It's not a bad logo by any means, I do enjoy it. Compared to some of the others, it's just not really on the same level. So next up we have the two 80s era logos. So this is obviously Peter Davison's, and this one here, the blue one, is Colin Baker's because they added more colour to it, more vibrance with the Colin Baker title sequence. I think that the blue neon works well in the title sequence, but just as a logo on its own, I don't think it works quite as well as its non-neon counterpart. So for this reason, I think, yeah, there's not much to say about this one, but I think it also belongs in C tier. Yeah, that feels right. Like, I don't really think that looks as good on merchandise as this one does. This one, to me, looks more natural on other things, because that's the thing. Obviously, it's all well and good if something works well on a tile sequence, but if it doesn't work well on merchandise, then that's a problem, because that's 90% of the time where you're going to see this logo the majority of the time. But I think for that reason, the 80s era one, it's simpler, and it's, again, very 80s. Kind of reminds me of, like, sort of retro-style computers, very sort of, like, early Apple vibes for some reason. But, yeah, for that reason, it's definitely a step up from the neon one, just as a logo, although I think I prefer the effect the Colin Baker one gives off in the sequence it's in, but as a logo itself, I think this goes into B tier. Next up, we have the Tom Baker era logo, which is obviously the descendant of the current logo, the new 60th anniversary themed diamond logo. And personally for me, this is a really strong logo. Obviously, this placement might give you some indication of where the other diamond one will go, but for now, I'm going to put it into A tier. The reason being is that whilst I really enjoy it, I think that it's not quite as standout and quite 2D. Obviously, that makes sense because it's a 70s era logo, but I do still really enjoy it. Interesting that we haven't got the multicolored variant of this one on this list. I assume that's just because it didn't appear in any sort of title sequence and instead was more just a merchandise thing. Personally, I do think the blue is better than the multicolored one. I feel like that makes it a bit more garish and a bit more, I don't know, sort of unappealing to me. So I think the blue is definitely the way to go. As I said, TARDIS blue is always going to be a preference of mine. But yeah, this logo really, really strong. I really enjoy it. I just think that, I don't know, it feels like it's missing something, I think, and I'll get more into that when I talk about the other one in a sec. Next up, I guess we should talk about the Pertwee era one. So as I sort of said before, the Pertwee era one is kind of just like the beta test version of the McGann one. It's born from the title sequence. It's green in colour. And yeah, as much as this is a solid logo, it is just sort of a worse version of the McGann one. And for that reason, I think, personally for me, it belongs in, I'm going to say, I'm torn between A and B because it doesn't really do anything wrong or doesn't really do anything that exceptionally that I probably would put it above the Davison era one just for like simplicity alone, so I'm going to go in A tier. Like, it's still good, it's just the McGann one improves on this one by giving it a much nicer texture in my opinion. But yeah, still not a bad logo by any means. Next up, we have the two 60s ones, which you can't actually see, so I'm just going to put them here. Obviously, I'm not actually going to put these here, but that's just to show you what they look like for now. So I'll start off with the Troughton one. To be completely honest with you, I've never been a big fan of this logo. It is just sort of a typeface, which, look, I get the reasoning why. It was the 60s, you know, we didn't have as much advanced text back then, but it just doesn't really stick out as much as any other logo, particularly the Hartnell one. I think the Hartnell one, in my opinion, is much stronger than the Troughton one. The Troughton one just feels quite generic, like it doesn't feel like a Doctor Who logo, it just feels like some text. I do like that the Who is slightly bigger than the Doctor, but it's like, it's almost a negligible amount. It doesn't really emphasize the mystique of the show or the sort of uniqueness of the show as much as I'd like it to. It does just sort of feel like, hey, we've got some text. It's not bad, but I think it is going to go into D tier along with the McCoy era one. Nothing personal against the Troughton era logo. The Hartnell one, on the other hand, obviously this was the original, the thing that introduced us to the show, and I really do enjoy it. As I said, the big bold Who is a really cool piece of iconography. It puts emphasis on that important question surrounding the show of who is this person, who is the Doctor, and that's something that many other logos have followed since, you know, with the smaller letters of Doctor and the bigger letters of Who. A very common trope within Doctor Who logo design. Obviously, it's in the McGowan one, it's in the Diamond one, and in the McCoy one as well. And this was obviously the one to originate that. There's not really anything this one does wrong because it is so simple, but at the same time, it doesn't really, like, stick out to me too much in a modern context anymore either. But I do prefer it to the 80s era one, so for that reason, I think it's going to go high B, I think is where I'm going to put the 60s era logo, in my opinion at least. And just to build up some suspense, we'll go over some of the other new Who logos before we get onto the main logo that we have currently. First off, we've got the more refined Tennant era logo, and yeah, this one is much better than its 2005 counterpart. I would still say it's not really a favourite of mine, I still enjoy it. It's very 2000s. Something I haven't really mentioned in this video up until that point is how well these logos fit their eras, and this logo does a good job of doing that in the same way that the 80s ones do a good job of reflecting the 80s. But outside of the 2000s context, I don't think this logo has aged as well as some others, in my personal opinion. I still enjoy it. It looks really good in the title sequence. It's very iconic on merch and stuff. I don't dislike it, but it's not a favourite of mine. Yeah, I think B tier is where this is going to go. I think that feels right. I think maybe in between these two. I think that feels right. That feels right. Next up, we have the Smith era one. Now, this is going to be a hot take. I know for a lot of people, this is their least favourite iteration of the logo. And to be honest, I see why. It does look kind of garish, kind of bulky, and I get why it wouldn't be to everyone's taste. However, I think the DW insignia is one of the cleverest pieces of branding they've ever done. I love the fact that the DW shapes the TARDIS and you've got the little light on the top. I think that's a stroke of genius on their part. As I said, it's not my favourite logo, but at the same time, I still enjoy it quite a bit. So for that reason, it's also going to go in B tier. As you might be able to tell, the new era ones tend to go a bit lower, and that's not because they're bad, it's just that I think simplicity rules in terms of Doctor Who logo design in my personal opinion, with a few exceptions I guess, but like, I don't know, I think there's just something a lot crisper about a lot of the classic designs, in my personal opinion. Next up, we have the Capaldi era one, which is basically just a stripped back version of the 2010 logo, minus the sort of, I guess, texturing and the DW insignia. And I do think it loses a lot of its charm without those elements, to be completely honest with you. It just sort of looks like bulky text without it, and it just doesn't quite have the same effect. So for that reason, much like the 2005 era RTD logo and the Colin Baker version of the 80s logo, it's going to go into C tier. I think that's another common trend you'll notice, like worse versions of similar logos will tend to go one step down from their original counterparts. Also, fun thing to note that I forgot to mention about the Colin one is that they actually do bend the logo slightly, which, yeah, I don't like as much as just straightforward, lines, I guess, but yeah. Now we've come on to the most recent two, and ooh, this is interesting. The Whittaker era one. The Whittaker era one's an interesting case because I think, I'll put it on screen so you guys can see, I think the Whittaker era one, it's not staying there by the way, but I think the Whittaker era one looks really good when you look at it up close, and I think in different colours, in particular, it really stands out, particularly white. There's a reason I use the white version of the logo in all my thumbnails before changing it over to the new RTD2 branding, because I think it stands out really well on a black background. However, as the yellow, and I know that not everyone's going to agree with me on this, I think the yellow looks a bit cheap and tacky. I don't know what it is, it just doesn't quite click for me. With that being said, I don't dislike it too much. I would also say that if you look at it from a distance, as we are now, I think the logo is a bit harder to read. Like, it doesn't have the big bold who that I quite like in a lot of the other logos. It's not as easy to tell what show this is from a distance in my mind. Like, imagine you see this like on a bus. It's going to be hard to read for a sec. It doesn't really stand out as much as some of the others. It doesn't really scream Doctor Who at you. I don't dislike it. It has grown on me over the years, but it's not one of my favourites. I've seen some people say it's their favourite, and you know what? That's fine. Everyone's allowed their opinions and all that, but for me, it's never going to be my favourite. I think C tier is where this one belongs. Like, in the end, I do just kind of think that it's a solid logo, but it's not one that I think is too remarkable. It's very sort of minimalist, like 2020s, which fits the time, I guess. But I don't know, there's something about the more bombastic logos that I really like. And then finally, we come to the big kahuna himself, the 2023 version of the Doctor Who logo for the RTD2 era, the 60th anniversary, and it's gonna go boop, 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 boop. Yeah, this to me improves on nearly everything that its original counterpart set up. Its proportions are slightly better, it has a glow element that's added on to make it stand out, they've made it more 3D and more modernised, the blue colouring is even more pronounced to fit in with the TARDIS, the yellow even sort of represents the regeneration sort of energy. This to me is like the perfect throwback logo and just insignia for the show. There's a reason why the logo for my channel is based on that diamond design, because I have always loved it. But this just seems like the perfect refined version of it. And yeah, obviously, can you tell I've got a sort of a soft spot for the blue logos with the McGann one and the 60th one at the top. I've seen a lot of people rag on this design. I personally love it. Obviously, some of its other variations, like the stack design and, line design, can be up for debate, but these are just the main ones that will likely feature in the title sequences. So yeah, those are my rankings for the Doctor Who logos. I'm pretty happy with them. I don't think there's anything I would change. But yeah, let me know in the comments below how you rank Doctor Who logos. Like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.